Drop the gun! Show me your hands!
We hear all the time about murder rates in cities, and everyone knows the larger the number, the worse it is. But a city's murder rate isn't equal for all people. Depending on your race, that number may be higher or lower. So let's take a look at 3 cities in America with large homicide rates: Chicago, Baltimore, and Milwaukee. I'll be using 2022 numbers, but in all of these cities, the 2023 numbers are following pretty close in line. So in 2022, Chicago had a murder rate of 26.6, Baltimore 63, and Milwaukee 40.7. But breaking things down further, we'll see in Chicago, which had 692 homicides, and we removed the ones listed as unknown, so we had 672 to work with. We saw that 78%, or 526, were of blacks, 13%, or 86, were Hispanic, 8%, or 55, were whites, and less than 1%, or 3, were Asian. Blacks are 29% of the population, whites 48%, Hispanics 10%, and Asians 6%, making the murder rates in Chicago, with an overall murder rate of 26.6, for blacks 70, Hispanics 33, whites 4.4, and for Asians 2. So you can look at these numbers and say to yourself, if you're white or Asian, Chicago is a very safe city, at least as far as homicides go. Baltimore is similar in that they reported 355 homicides in 2022. Again, removing the unknowns, we get 85% were black, 4% white, 2% Hispanic, and less than 1% Asian. The rest were listed as other. In Baltimore, blacks make up 62% of the population, whites 30%, Asians 2.5%, and Hispanics 2%. The overall murder rate in Baltimore is 63. For blacks, it's 60, Hispanics 36, Asians 9, and for whites 5.9. And in Milwaukee, things are very similar. Milwaukee had 224 homicides in 2022. 188, or 84%, were black, 18, or 8%, were Hispanic, 11, or 5%, were white, and 2, or 1%, were Asian. The population is 42% white, 39% black, 8.3% Hispanic, and 4.6% Asian, making the city's murder rates overall 40.7, but for blacks 87, for Hispanics 39.6, for Asians 7.2, and for whites 4.8. Baltimore was the worst for whites at 5.9, which is, for an American city, really good. Baltimore was also the worst for Asians at 9. Hispanics were in the 30s in all 3 cities, but highest in Milwaukee at 39.6. And for blacks, the number was the highest across the board, but the worst in Milwaukee, where it's 87. Chicago, which is generally touted as the bad guy when it comes to crime in America, is safer for all races except blacks when it comes to murder rates. These 3 cities all also have one more thing in common: declining populations. Chicago has dropped by 1 million people since its peak in the 1950s and 60s. Baltimore has dropped by 40% from its peak in the 1950s, and Milwaukee's population has dropped by 25% from its peak in the 1960s. Declining populations and rising crime, none of these 3 cities would be considered safe, but they are much safer for some over others, depending on your race.